Quick announcements. First Knife merch and collector's card is available. You can get it down below. And because I got a lot of questions, I want to answer that real quick. I will be adding a lot more cards. I just want to take my time and deliver the first one in really high quality. Here's a teaser of some other ones in case you were wondering. Second of all, with the Elden Ring DLC out, I debated posting videos on this channel since Let Me Solo Her is my highest viewed video of all time, but Evan Explains is a channel I have for single player games, and so this is a twofold announcement. One is that Elden Ring content will go on my second channel. That channel has a lot of similar content to my Evan F channel, just for Elden Ring and more single player focused games. And the second fold is that I will be bringing back zombies content here soon. I've gotten a lot of questions about it, so I want to let you know that I am still planning on doing that. This is really the only way I can talk to you guys on an announcement basis, but I do want to also give away some more stuff, and I want you guys to stay in the loop. Oh, and finally, this video has a sponsor. Thank you. Speaking of endgame, moments, raids, etc., I was really happy to say that this most recent raid zone had support from Intel. So please listen along as I gas them up and consider supporting events in the future by just simply clicking the link in the description. Intel Core 14th Gen processors deliver high performance and efficiency thanks to a groundbreaking new performance hybrid design. This includes the Intel i9 processor, the Intel Core i7 processor, and the Intel Core i5 processor, all offered within the StarForge product line. These are built and hand tested in the US, and they directly powered Raid Zone the whole time we were streaming during the 24+ hours event. Thanks to Intel for sponsoring this video, and please enjoy the rest of the video. This is the ultimate raid ranking video, and while I know there is a lot of raids, it should still be stated that there has been 18 raids in Destiny's 10-year journey, and I'm going to include remasters here. In this video, we look at every single raid, from the original Vault of Glass to the end of the first Sagas raid with Salvation's Edge. The criteria is simple for my ranking, and hopefully it's as fair as possible in context. The ranking criteria will go off of a combination of encounter design, loot, replayability, aka mechanics that don't make you bored, and day one experiences. This is not for story and lore reasons, because, well, I think people would be very, very biased that way in an already subjective list. Obviously, with a ton of raids, there's a ton to go over, so if you agree or disagree or have anything else that you want to say about the raids, leave me a comment and be sure to like this video as it gets to more people. Let's get down to my ranking. Number 18, Eater of Worlds. I think you knew this one was going to be here at the start of the list. Eater of Worlds, you deserve the makeover treatment so badly. You might be sitting at home asking why this raid layer was so poorly received, and the answer is that it just had nothing very special to it. For starters, it has a raid encounter that just asks you to kill enemies, and others that feel like filler to get to the boss, so the encounter design is also weak compared to others. This also has loot that is just downright offensive, with 2 drops at the time that were both pretty bad even for the time. On top of that, there is no exotic, just a catalyst that was added in the Solstice of Heroes event with Telesto. The armor is perfect for my Titan, but nobody else, and the raid's only saving quality is its final boss. I don't want to discredit accomplishments since winning a raid race is still a huge win, but that being said, there wasn't much of a race. It was just kinda over. The cool silver lining was that an LFG team won the race, but this raid was not good down to the replayability of it. Even Prestige mode, while a cool concept, added no new mechanics, no new loot outside of pretty generic cosmetics, and it restricted loadouts. Moving on. Number 17, Crota's End, the original. Crota should be an easy pick for his placement here. The God Knight, the prince who slayed Eris Morn's fire team and the cheesiest boss of all time. Imagine being a player on day 1 Crota and seeing that the first clear was over 6 hours long, and then within only a couple of weeks' time, solo Crota gets completed by the legend himself. Now, Crota had a couple of good things going for him in the original version. The loot was good, offering weapons like Black Hammer, which is now Whisper of the Worm, the Necrochasm, which was just a solid choice, and some other legendaries that really fit the theme, and even offered a perk which let you do damage through the Hive shields, Along with the Glowhoo shader and a few other pieces like the raid's armor, Crota nailed the loot section. On top of that, at launch and day one, even if day ones weren't quite raid races yet, it's impressive that Crota has very minimal clears and a long day one experience. But I think that's all it has going for it. Crota is a 6-player raid that can be easily soloed to this day, and Crota unfortunately does not have any good encounter design compared to the other remaining raids on the list. The first encounter, while creative, is running away from thralls that never really feel like a threat past the first time you ever do it. The bridge was a lot of waiting. Ute was over in 30 seconds, and Crota had one player doing all of the damage with the sword. Overall, there's a reason why people don't rank this raid very high and kind of laugh at it when you bring it up. It was goofy. Number 16, Root of Nightmares. Unless you're a solo player, this raid is just pretty bad, especially given the context of its placement here in the series. Root of Nightmares came out during a time of questions in the Destiny series. Why was Lightfall not the end? Why was Final Shape made as an announcement with Lightfall? Who are Rohan and Nimbus? Why are we traveling away from the main story of the game in the most hyped time in the series that we had ever seen? It all felt so off. Root of Nightmares would suffer at the hand of these decisions. What is an otherwise gorgeous raid to look at inside of the Witness's pyramid ship would have nothing to do with the Witness and instead everything to do with Nezarec. On its own, this would be fine, and my list doesn't care for story here, but the encounters in Ron outside of the planets are all very questionable. Nothing feels like it builds on top of itself. Instead, the same mechanic that was present the whole raid is still present to the very end, without any big upgrades. The only addition is a jumping puzzle about halfway through, which added a small mechanic tweak that would find itself in the final boss room. The loot and planets is probably the raid's greatest strength, and you could even call it its saving grace, with a few options for both PvP and PvE that are pretty rad, but otherwise this raid suffers. The day one experience was bad enough that everyone lost their minds because it was just too easy. Ron, I love you for the solo challenges and some of your loot, but you're here for a reason.
Yeah.
Number 15, Garden of Salvation. I say this with love, because Garden of Salvation has been growing on me. Garden of Salvation came at this time of Destiny where Bungie was finally free from Activision, off of the back of Forsaken, and onto the shoulders of Shadowkeep sat the Garden of Salvation. The problem was that those shoulders were much weaker now. Shadowkeep was and forever will be a divisive DLC, and its raid will be seen as a departure from its main premise. We have a giant pyramid ship, yet a raid in the Black Garden. The loot here doesn't offer a single heavy ammo weapon, and added the most fittingly divisive exotic ever made with Divinity. The quest was great, but the impact and community sentiment made it too much of a must-have, and trivialized boss fights that would otherwise reward solid aim. The raid design was also unique. I wouldn't say its mechanics have been used a lot since, and they stand out compared to many other raids. Are they the best? No, not really, but they beat standing and waiting on a plate, and they are creative enough that it's commendable. I especially came to both love Consecrated Mind and Sanctified Mind boss fights over time, and I can't really name a bad encounter in Garden. It's just that I can't name any that I really jump out of my seat for. The day one was a decent one with a great finish by the end, but I think this one suffered from what another does on this list, being the only one for the year. But this one was on a year that not very many people loved either. So for now, Garden of Salvation will sit here on my list. Sorry, old Evan, where I said this was one of the best raids. Garden could just use a lot of love, and a big loot refresh, and a heavy weapon, and it might be a very healthy raid one day. Number 14, Crown of Sorrows. There's a tale as old as time with Crown of Sorrows, and that is the old bait and switch that came at the cost of coding. Day 1 Crown of Sorrows was supposed to be the big payoff for Math Class and Datto, but instead it was a case of two teams in a photo finish. Crown ranked as my highest raid controversy for a reason, but the Day 1 experience might as well be one of the worst for the wider community. This was Bungie's first contest raid, and the one that also required everyone to be exhausted before they could get in. The raid came out the same day as the Season of Opulence, but it was about 6 to 7 hours after the release and needed a good amount of levels grinded, so this was exhausting before the long day 1 raid race, and it almost ruined the fun of the raid itself. The loot was also not really great from this one, and even looked uglier than its poor selection. The biggest win for Crown was the encounters, because they are really great. A lot of people didn't love the opening, and while I sympathize with that, it could have been sped up a lot depending on how fast the enemies died. The other portion of the raid, aka the Galron 1 and 2, are both just tremendous, and some of the most creative Bungie has ever been with raid encounters. I especially love the final fight and sitting in the crown, and it leans into a lot of creativity involving teamwork. But I feel like the rest of Crown is messy and doesn't leave a ton of room outside of the last couple of encounters. I am setting aside my personal bias, and I am putting Crown here. Maybe one day it will change, but for now, this one is my first divisive pick. Number 13, King's Fall. This is my second divisive pick, but original King's Fall, even without the new one, would have aged really badly. Obviously, the set piece of Oryx and the many boss encounters before are iconic, as is the day 1 experience being won by some of the largest names in the live streaming space at the time. That being said, I can't really think of very many weapons I constantly was using even back then from the large assortment of raid weapons, with 9 for offer here, and that doesn't even include Touch of Malice, which was the DLC's major exotic quest. Touch of Malice was the ultimate Oryx stunner back then, as it was just a solid choice, but majority of the others weren't getting used a lot even if they looked great. Don't get me wrong, I loved King's Fall back in the day, but the encounters even then had some that I never wanted to play. Like Totems, which was just standing around on plates and waiting for enemies to spawn. And after a few set piece moments with Oryx, that fight got old very fast. At the time, this wasn't an unpopular opinion either, and a lot of people grew to dislike King's Fall because it was the only raid for that entire year. So, I'm gonna be honest here, guys. I think this one deserves this spot. Number 12, Vaults of Glass. For the OGs of Destiny, this was probably your favorite raid, and that's because nobody forgets their first time. With a raid, that is. What else did you think I meant, you silly goose? Vault of Glass was a great introduction to raiding and was so good at its job that every other raid since, for the most part, follows the same format. You have an encounter, then you have a downtime section where you can just have fun and explore, with another encounter right after, then more downtime, etc, etc. What Vault of Glass did really well was the replayability and the loot. The encounters didn't age all that well. In fact, that is its biggest flaw. These encounters mostly don't hold up and are very boring by today's standards, but even at the time, there were some sleepers too. Everyone used to skip the confluxes and entrance because they didn't offer much for loot and were long with a lot of standing around. The Gatekeepers and Atheon were done pretty fast too, and Templar just fell over. So really, Gorgons and Oracles were the hardest, but Gorgons only because everyone got impatient, and Oracles because you couldn't just speed past the mechanic. I will say that for all of these faults that would eventually play out, I can't bash on Vault of Glass too hard, since it was the very first time any game took on this raid format for an FPS, and Bungie did really well in the first delivery. Day 1 was very long, but I think it was only as long as it was because nobody really knew Vault of Glass existed outside of very few, and the level requirement restricted almost everyone from playing. That being said, it ranks this high due to the loot, as every single weapon might as well have been a best in slot and still have people drooling over them to this day. The weapons were so good that the first episode, Echoes, even took the identity of the exotic Vex Mythoclast and just asked, what if this was a rocket launcher? Vault of Glass stands out due to it having loot every week players wanted and needed if you were going to work within that level system. And that leveling system isn't a bad one either. In fact, I actually kind of prefer that, especially now that we have transmog, but that's for a different day. Vaults of Glass made sure that you were there every single week is the point. Forever 29 was a thing for a reason. golf balls, and energy balls. I was always happy visiting here every week, but Vogue is just old. Number 11, Leviathan. What kind of ambition do you have to have as a studio in order to create an activity that evolves on the format while offering a true sequel experience? Interconnected levels with great raid encounters that you could get lost in, with fantastic traversal of some of the best loot and challenging raid bosses with a nice payoff. This sounds like a dream, right? Well, it is. Leviathan was this ambitious idea. It was this sequel experience. It had interconnected raid design unlike any other raid before and after. It had great loot even, but the rest left so much to be desired. I want to compliment Leviathan on changing routes to each encounter every single week, to the point where there was even a speedrun week for the best route called Levy Week. I also want to compliment the extremely well thought out underbelly one more time, as it was easy to get lost and forget you were even going to the next part of the raid. Adding to the scale, Leviathan carried. Now I want to compliment the day one raid, as it was a good one for the time, as racing was making a name for itself back then. However, I want to say that the payoff and the encounters being experienced were lackluster at best. Levy has one boss and a bunch of minigames. One encounter, you're going around in a circle at a bathhouse and shooting lanterns. Another, you're racing through a Doritos Crash Course level. The other one is a bit better with stealth and war beasts, but the final one was a fun fight with a bad payoff, as Callus was more or less a teaser for Callus. The replayability of Callus was the largest joke of all, with Callus becoming so easy that every single exotic versus Callus was done. I think given a proper facelift, Leviathan could shine again one day, but unfortunately, it just didn't stick the landing on some of its best ideas. Number 10, Crota's End Remaster. Crota, you finally got your justice, but at what cost? Well, the cost of a lot of waiting mechanics. I think Crota's Remaster suffers from an issue of trying really hard not to be cheesable. The whole mechanic is the Chalice of Light. A meter appears on the screen, and you just have to wait to do anything with it. I believe this breaks the whole flow state of the raid, because there are times that you just want to do something, but then you have to sit there and wait until the meter takes its time to fill up, and that's just not fun for me. I can understand how some people really like this, but when I'm sitting at Crota killing the same enemies a bunch of times over, so I can give time for my chalice to fill up and I can pass it, that's just kind of boring to me. Crota Remaster improves a lot from the original though. Like the first encounter being way more spicy, the bridge now needing everyone to play a part, Ur-Yut being an actual boss fight, and Crota having more team-involved damage. I believe the loot is also pretty good here, and Necrochasm is one of the better exotics in the game. Way better than the OG one. Again, I liked Crota, and I love that his Day 1 remaster was the longest of all Day 1 remastered raid races. But I can't get excited thinking about doing runs of this raid for my loot, because it just doesn't utilize mechanics I personally enjoy. Number 9, Scourge of the Past. This raid was one of my favorites just for the pure enjoyment of its encounters. You're telling me I get to race around an entire city on a Sparrow. I can drive a tank too if I want to. Then I can do a maze and run away from a giant servitor just to fight a Gundam and rip some damage. Yeah, sign me up. The loot here was great too, with the threat level shotgun, the tempered dynamo, and of course, Anarchy came from this raid. Great encounters and great loot, but the problem with Scourge is that it didn't have a great Day 1 experience. Loot can be great, encounters can be fun, but when Day 1 is ruined by some DDoS attacks and bugs like it was by an actual cyber terrorist group named Orange Justice, yeah, it ruined a lot of it. That being said, Scourge remains as one of Bungie's best, and even more, one of the most fluid raids when you get down to it. I would love to return here as a revamped version, because some of the encounters, while really fun, feel like they could be fleshed out just a little bit more. With some new loot and an even larger scale, I think this one could shine. Number 8, Spire of Stars. Oh boy, I am going against my own bias here, and I am ranking Spire of Stars right here for a few reasons. Look, I love and I miss Valkaor. I love the whole dang raid layer, even the opening and the jumping puzzle. I even love the encounter before Val, where I am just doing mechanics of Valkaor. But of course, that's all I can really say. The loot in this raid is so bad that it holds back an otherwise fantastic experience. The encounters are fun, but Val is really the reason that you're here. And it aged okay. On the fantastic day one raid, it was impossibly hard. But by the time Val left us all, you could very easily just shoot 2 rockets and the boss would fall over. Again, this raid suffered from age more than anything, but its loot kept a lot of the Destiny community from ever playing it, even if it was an enjoyable time. I can compliment that you needed a minimum of 5 players to even begin the final boss, but Spire of Stars suffered from similar issues of Crown of Sorrow. And for me, it prevented both of those from being ranked any higher. Number 7, Vogue Remaster. Vault of Glass Remaster has about everything you would want out of one. Encounters that are better fit to modern day while being a nice nod to the original. Loot that fits in well without being the best at everything. Replayability is much higher than the original outside of Confluxes, and a day one remaster that was a really fun one to be a part of. I especially loved how Vault of Glass's remaster left no stone unturned and made nods to everything. This is just the best Vogue can be without completely remaking the encounters from scratch, and for that reason, it's right here. Number 6, King's Fall Remaster. King's Fall was pretty low on the list because it suffered a lot of aging issues while having loot that wasn't particularly great. There was a great sense of scale and boss quality, but Oryx felt like the part that aged the worst from the whole raid. In comes King's Fall Remastered, a raid that rectified everything about the original. Encounter design was more fluid for the current day and had some puzzly obstacles like War Priest. Replayability was much more satisfying because you could damage Oryx and even totems got a facelift. The day one was solid even if it was around the same amount of time as Vault of Glass. The only issue I still have with King's Fall is that while Oryx is fun to damage, he just kinda stands there and lets you shoot at his chest. It is a very predictable fight that feels the same every time, and I don't love that. That and the loot is still very questionable. Touch of Malice is good, not great, and Zali's Bane is an S tier weapon, but there is 5 other legendaries that don't really shine in comparison. I love this remaster, but these things hold it back from my top 5. Number 5, Deepstone Crypt. This one should be a no-brainer to be in the top 5, but Deepstone is an absolute marvel to behold. Deepstone Crypt offers incredible encounter design with Atrax being a very unique boss. The server room being a unique perspective challenge, having to use scanner to look through the floor. Jumping puzzles that will make you just happy to exist. Encounters that will have you crashing down to Europa. And a final boss that was a little disappointing. Deepstone Crypt was great for the time, but it got even better after Bungie revamped it. This was also the first raid to offer a spoils chest for rolls, and was almost a perfect one from top to bottom. The day one race was good, even if it was a little short for a brand new raid, and the reactions from the community was that it was a great raid. However, the only things that hold it back from a higher spot was the fact that the final boss was a boss we have seen many times before, and that day one difficulty to the day one raiders was seen as too easy. When you go from less than 1% completion rate to 11% completions, and this is before Bungie enacted the 48-hour rule to get the emblem, I think that speaks to the levels of challenge of this. Deepstone is always one of my favorites to revisit, but I just wish it didn't end with Taniks. And I also wish there were difficulty options here, because there's no master version of Deepstone or anything like that. Again, we're in the top 5 territory, so this list is about to get very down to the details. Number 4, Wrath of the Machine. The forbidden fruit of Destiny raid experiences, and the best of the Destiny 1 raids in my opinion, goes to Wrath of the Machine. Other than a lackluster day 1 experience, because let's be honest, this raid got run over, everything else is just close to perfect for Destiny standards as it gets. Fluid encounter design that doesn't stop giving, with set pieces and bosses that reward teamwork and can all be mastered to make it faster. No mechanics that bother me here really at all, and with an environment just oozing with atmosphere, makes Wrath of the Machine a must play if you can. I don't know if Bungie will ever remaster Wrath, because of the Siva assets that aren't really in Destiny 2, and the whole Splicer Fallen enemy type that also isn't in Destiny 2, but man, I want it all back and better than before. The loot was great with the idea of enhanced perks all the way back in 2016 on the hard mode raid weapons. And of course, Outbreak Prime's puzzle quest that still has the community in a chokehold. Outside of the encounter before Axis and the day one being a short one, I think Wrath is as close to perfection as Destiny 1 could have asked for, and it's a shame that it's still not in Destiny 2. Number 3, Vow of the Disciple. Let me get this out of the way now. Connection issues on day one hurt Vow of the Disciple so badly that I considered never raid racing again. And, well, not even a consideration. I haven't raid raced since. But Raid Zone is something that I do now, and I think it was a good outcome of an otherwise brutal day. Vow was the peak moment in Destiny 2 raiding, and it was interrupted by these issues. I know how racers felt, but I can't imagine how Bungie felt knowing that a small bug prevented their best work in years from getting the tender love that it should have had. Vow, other than this, only suffers from the entrance being one giant loading screen. But outside of that, the raid is damn near flawless. From the puzzly encounters to the fast-paced action with some of Destiny's best bosses, I could go on and on about Vow of the Disciple, but the only thing I always wanted was for Vow to be as challenging as it was that first day, other than the servers. And Pantheon solidified why I loved this raid so much. It was a perfect blend, and Shadowrolk only made me wish he was in the original. The loot had the best legendary special weapon Bungie has ever made with Forbearance, and overall some of the best loot Destiny has ever seen across the board. With a brand new enemy type in Rolk, you just can't go wrong with Vow being in the top 3. Number 2, Last Wish. I mean no disrespect by putting Last Wish here. In fact, this was the hardest decision I have ever made, and might even suffer from recency bias in some ways. But Last Wish is number 2 and not number 1, only due to the fact that age has not been super kind to this raid. Last Wish was so hard when it first came out that it took many teams multiple weeks to even be ready for it. And the loot offerings at the time were so iconic since it was the first time random rolls came to raids. Last Wish still has the most encounters of any raid with 6, because Queen's Walk is that epilogue moment, and it absolutely deserves its flowers. The race was an insane one, being close to 19 hours long. The encounters are incredibly replayable, and all innovated what a Destiny raid could offer. But I came to this decision after casting an event for World of Warcraft raiders taking on Destiny raids. These players who had never touched the game before were able to pass through Last Wish without even learning to consistently aim down sights on their weapons, and I think that's pretty bad. If it weren't due to these issues of difficulty, I would have ranked Last Wish still as my highest, but we're down to the very fine details, and only one edged it out. Number 1, Salvation's Edge. Absolute cinema in every way, and the most fitting of a number 1 spot. Salvation's Edge just has the sauce. Encounter design is an evolution of what we have seen before, with enemy placement intentionally there to stay challenging. Puzzle mechanics with a timer that doesn't let you sit comfortable and keeps the pressure of the moment in hand. Replayability in this raid is so strong, with encounters always being a challenge due to Bungie changing how raids and dungeons scaling works, that it just keeps you underleveled a little bit. And the Master Raid is the first time it's actually been fully rewarding, with a Memento and Adepts having enhanced perks. I can't stress enough how much I love a good puzzle, and this raid has the best of all the puzzles. I love the movement of Rolk, but I had it down to a science where it just became too easy. And I'm happy to say that the Witness is everything I wished Oryx would have been in the damage phase, asking you to stay alert the whole time. Loot-wise, this has some of the best offerings of all time, and work in different builds across the board. The day 1 raid race was also the longest of all time, and only one team cleared in 24 hours, which is just insane, and I just made a raid video on that you should go watch. This is the final raid in the 10-year journey, and I am happy to call it, for now, the best raid Bungie ever made. So there is my list. And while I have my opinions, I know you will have yours too. Be sure to stay tuned for my ranking of every single raid encounter in Destiny, since that one needs an update, and Raid Cheese Part 2. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.